Sometimes, the smartest man isn't the one who speaks the loudest, but the one who knows what never to say. Over the next 10 episodes, you'll witness the rise, fall, and transformation of a man whose words built his empire and nearly destroyed it. This is the story behind the 7 things an intelligent man never says. Episode 1. The Rise of a Fool in Disguise. On the surface, Adrian King had it all. A corner office with glass walls that overlooked the city skyline. A tailored suit collection sharp enough to cut glass. His name whispered with equal parts admiration and envy in every boardroom he entered. To the outside world, he was unstoppable, a rising star, a born leader, a man who always seemed 3 steps ahead. But no one heard what he said behind closed doors. In meetings, he smiled. In private, he sneered. He dismissed his team's ideas with offhand cruelty, mocked those who dared to question him, and clung to power through manipulation disguised as charm. Winners don't need advice, he liked to say. They just need people who know how to follow. His rise wasn't built on brilliance. It was built on fear, on whispered threats, on subtle humiliation served with a polite smile. Brick by reckless brick, he built his empire not on wisdom, but on arrogance. At home, things weren't much different. Dinners were performances. His partner smiled politely while nursing wounds he refused to see. His friends existed for optics, not connection. Every conversation was a monologue wrapped in vanity, every compliment a veiled weapon. Yet the world applauded. Promotions came. Invitations arrived. Awards were given. Success, he thought, is proof I'm right. But beneath the marble floors of his empire, cracks had begun to form. Tiny, silent, invisible to his inflated ego. Not from what he did, but from what he said. The world watched him rise. No one yet realized how high a fool could climb before the fall became fatal. Episode 2. The First Mistake. That's impossible. The boardroom smelled of expensive cologne, stale ambition, and freshly printed failure. Adrian sat at the head of the long, gleaming table, fingers steepled beneath his chin like a man preparing to crush someone's future with a single, well-timed word. Across from him, a young analyst, too eager, too optimistic, too foolish to know better, outlined a bold, unconventional strategy that could have revolutionized their stagnant portfolio. Charts, projections, numbers all carefully presented. Adrian didn't hear a word past the first 5 seconds. He was already rehearsing his dismissal. When the room fell silent, waiting for his verdict, he gave it with a half smile and a razor's edge in his tone. That's impossible. Laughter followed, not from humor, but from fear. The others chuckled because they knew it was safer than silence. Adrian had spoken. Therefore, the idea was dead. The young analyst's face crumbled in real time, something between embarrassment and the quiet death of early ambition. Adrian leaned back, satisfied. Another day, another lesson taught, another future extinguished for the sake of maintaining his throne. What Adrian didn't see, what his arrogance blinded him to, was the man sitting 3 seats down. Mr. Vaughn, silent, smiling faintly, watching, because Mr. Vaughn didn't think it was impossible. 3 months later, Vaughn would fund that exact idea privately. It would make him millions, and it would plant the first real crack in Adrian's carefully curated empire. But for now, Adrian remained blind, drunk on his own certainty. He believed power came from having the last word. He had no idea how much it would cost him. Episode 3. The Ego Unmasked. I already know that. Adrian had always believed intelligence was a performance, and he was its leading man. Sharp suit, sharper tongue, a reputation built on quick answers and quicker dismissals. In meetings, his confidence filled the room like smoke. In truth, it was choking everyone beneath it. That afternoon, a junior associate, fresh from a prestigious school, brimming with ideas and a quiet kind of courage, made the mistake of offering insight during a strategy session. Not a challenge, just a perspective, a refinement, a small but significant improvement to Adrian's plan. For a moment, the room held its breath. Would Adrian listen? Consider? Adapt? He didn't even look up from his phone. I already know that. 3 words. Flat, cutting, designed to remind everyone who held the crown. The associate flushed. Others exchanged glances but said nothing. They'd seen it before. Adrian couldn't stand the idea that someone younger, someone lower, might see a flaw he hadn't. The irony. He didn't know it. Not really. He hadn't considered it. But now he never would. His pride wouldn't allow it. What Adrian failed to notice was how, in that moment, something in the room shifted. Tiny, invisible currents of discontent began to swirl. Respect curdled quietly into resentment. The associate wouldn't forget the humiliation. Neither would the others. Behind closed doors, whispers began. He's slipping. He's more ego than intellect now. Careful. He'll burn this place down before he lets anyone else shine. Adrian thought he was untouchable. but the knives were being sharpened in silence. Not for his throne, not yet, but for the moment when his weakness became undeniable. For now, he sat at the head of the table, certain he'd won another battle, but the war was already shifting beneath his feet. Episode 4. The Blame Game. It's not my fault. Failure never arrives loudly. It starts as a whisper, missed details, ignored advice, small decisions wrapped in arrogance. By the time Adrian noticed the fallout, the damage was already done. The quarterly results came in brutal and undeniable. Profits had slipped. A deal he'd championed had collapsed under its own weight. Clients were quietly pulling away. Rumors had begun to spread beyond the glass walls of his empire. Whispers about recklessness, about leadership without foresight. In the emergency meeting that followed, all eyes turned to Adrian. Some looked to him for answers, others for accountability. He gave them neither. It's not my fault. He said it casually, like a man brushing lint from his lapel. Poor execution. Weak follow-through. The team didn't deliver. I was clear about what needed to happen. Silence pressed against the room like a storm cloud gathering weight. Across the table, Mr. Vaughn watched him with the patience of a predator. Others took quiet notes, not on the company's future, but on Adrian's unraveling grip. True leader would have owned the mistake, would have rallied the room with humility, vision, strength. Adrian offered only excuses wrapped in blame. Behind the scenes, something shifted. A silent enemy, someone Adrian had once underestimated, belittled, ignored, recognized this as the moment to move. Seeds of quiet rebellion began to sprout in conversations behind locked doors. Adrian, of course, left the meeting with his head high. He believed he'd deflected the worst of it. That blame, like power, was a tool best wielded with precision. What he couldn't see was how quickly his empire had begun to rot beneath him. Not because of others, because of him, and because of the words he couldn't stop saying. Episode 5. The Moment of Stagnation. That's just how I am. At home, the walls echoed with silence heavier than any argument. Adrian's partner, Elena, had spent years standing beside him, watching the man she once loved slip into a shadow of himself. The sharp wit that once sparked their conversations was now a weapon, cutting deeper with every careless phrase. One evening, after another day of cold exchanges and unspoken regrets, Elena finally broke. "You never listen. You never change. You're always the same," she said, voice cracking. "You say it's just how you are, but that's not love. It's surrender." Adrian's defense was immediate and familiar. "That's just how I am." The words hung between them, like a door slammed shut. Not an excuse, not a truth, but a wall built brick by brick from years of stubborn pride and refusal. Elena's eyes filled with tears, not for him, but for the man she'd hoped he'd become. She loved him, but she couldn't love the man who refused to grow. That night, she packed a small bag, not out of anger, but out of quiet desperation. Adrian sat alone in the dark, the echo of her footsteps fading down the hall. He said nothing, not because he was numb, because he believed words were useless if they couldn't protect his pride. But in that stillness, the true cost of his words, and his refusal to change, finally began to seep in. His empire was crumbling, and now so was the life he thought was unshakable. Episode 6. The Isolation Grows. You'll never understand. The office once buzzed with camaraderie and shared purpose. Now, it was a cold arena, where shadows lengthened and whispers echoed. Adrian sat at his desk, eyes glazed over from too many long nights and too many lost battles. Colleagues once eager to greet him now skirted the edges of his presence, their smiles tight, their words measured. When a trusted friend approached with genuine concern, Adrian's reply was a knife cloaked in defensiveness. "You'll never understand." Those words weren't just a rejection of sympathy, they were a barricade, a fortress built to keep others out of the crumbling parts of his world. But instead of protection, they bred suspicion. What was he hiding? What truths was he too afraid to face? Behind his back, alliances shifted like sand beneath a storm. Former allies whispered in quiet corners, their patience thinning, their ambitions rising. Adrian, drowning in his own fortress of pride and pain, failed to see the quiet coup unfolding. Every "you'll never understand" pushed him further from those who might have saved him, from those who could have been his allies in the war he was losing. In his quest to shield his ego, he was building his own prison. Episode 7. The Breaking Point. What's in it for me? The empire Adrian had fought so fiercely to build was crumbling around him. Desperation clawed at his chest like a wild animal, raw, unrelenting. In a dimly lit office, far from the eyes of the public and the cameras, Adrian sat across from a longtime confidant, someone who had stood by him through triumph and turmoil. But tonight, there was no loyalty left. Adrian's voice was low, coated with a cold calculation that didn't suit him. "What's in it for me?" he asked bluntly, cutting through years of friendship like a blade. The words weren't just a question, They were a confession, a revealing glimpse into a man stripped bare by greed and fear. His confidant's eyes narrowed. The trust, once ironclad, shattered in that moment. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into plans. Betrayal wasn't just inevitable, it was brewing like a storm ready to break. Adrian thought he was playing the game, but in reality, he was being played. The final act of selfishness marked the beginning of his downfall in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Episode 8, The Fall. I don't care. The world Adrian had controlled with calculated words and silent threats was unraveling in slow, painful spirals. His job, stripped away by board members hungry for stability. His closest allies, vanished, replaced by cold faces that once smiled, but now only watched with thinly veiled contempt. Even Elena, the last tether to a life he once cherished, was gone, leaving behind echoes of a love buried beneath walls he built with his own stubbornness. In the hollow silence of his empty apartment, Adrian sat alone, the weight of it all pressing down like a suffocating fog. When a former colleague called, offering an olive branch, a chance at reconciliation, his reply was brutal and final. I don't care. Those words echoed louder than any apology ever could. It wasn't indifference. It was the last defense of a man broken by his own choices, a man who had learned too late that words can destroy as surely as actions. The empire was gone. The respect vanished. The man left behind was a shell, haunted by the realization that sometimes, silence is the only language left to speak. Episode 9, The Disappearance and the Silence. Adrian vanished. Not with a bang, but with a whisper, a silence so deep it swallowed the rumors whole. Whispers spread like wildfire. Had he cracked under pressure? Was it a breakdown? A reinvention? Or worse, had the man who once ruled with words simply died? But the truth was far more complicated. Hidden away in a small, dim apartment miles from the city's glare, Adrian was confronting his ghost alone. No meetings, no calls, no demands, just silence. He devoured books on leadership, humility, and restraint. He listened, really listened, to voices he had ignored for years. He faced truths he had buried beneath layers of ego and bravado. The man who had once believed power came from speaking the loudest was learning a different lesson. True intelligence speaks less, and listens more. Every day in solitude chipped away at the fool he'd been, forging a quieter, sharper version of himself. The world waited, curious, skeptical, and aware that this disappearance was not an end, but a beginning. Episode 10, The Return, a man transformed by restraint. The boardroom was silent when Adrian stepped back inside, but it wasn't the same room. The air was different. The eyes watching him were sharper, curious, cautious. Gone was the brash man who spoke to dominate. Gone was the fool who wielded words like weapons. Now, Adrian spoke rarely, but when he did, every word carried weight. He listened more than he spoke. He measured every phrase. He held his tongue when others expected him to roar. His silence unnerved more than his words ever had. Colleagues whispered, "Who is this man?" Enemies wondered if the quiet was a sign of weakness, or something far more dangerous. And the final twist. He didn't reclaim power by shouting louder or tearing others down. He won by mastering the rarest skill of all, knowing what never to say. His empire didn't just survive, it thrived. Not because of what he said, but because of what he withheld. The man who had lost everything returned stronger, not in spite of his silence, but because of it. And as he looked out over the city skyline, calm and collected, one truth was clear. Sometimes, the smartest words are the ones you never speak.